going to do a buildup of 3/4 of an inch on this particular patient here. I'm sorry, 1.25 inch elevation on 2 pair. And these are tennis shoes, and we're going to build them up. So I'm going to come back and put something over to protect the top of that, and then I'll take the sole off, and then we'll do the buildup. Well, I'm starting to protect the shoe from getting dirt and particles on it by putting tape around the sole. And so I've got my vegetable sack that I'm going to put over to keep the dirt and glue off. A beautiful shoe like that doesn't need to be scarred by glue and things. So I first put a base coat around the sole edge to grip it. Then my vegetable sack I'll put tape on to secure it so it'll stay in place. I don't want to get it too close to where I'm be cutting the sole off because it gets in the way, and when I glue it all up, sometimes the sack gets stuck in the glue that the sole goes onto. So now I'm taping and trying to get it all taped securely so nothing, not glue or particles, can get in there. You notice this sack is a little small, but it tightens up quite well, which keeps it really tight around the sole edge. Now, sometimes I try to soften the glue on the tape by putting it against my smock, because if it's fresh glue, it sometimes is too tight. It'll tear off the finish. Now you see I've got this one wrapped. I've got the tape on. I've got it protected. Now what I'm using is my knife, my 6-inch or 8-inch knife, to cut the sole off, and I've sharpened it up so we're going to try. I'm not sure how that sole is, if it's hollow all the way through or just all hard plastic or just has lots of air in it, whatever. But as you can see, I'm starting to cut, and it's fairly hollow, but it is enough of a sole I can secure a midsole to and actually do my build-up. I try to cut about 1/4 inch from the sole into the upper, and that's just about the depth of the tread, and that way I don't cut the tread and it stays nice, and yet I've cut enough of the top that I have enough to go glued onto and hold my sole. I try to work both sides, maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch, and to keep the line. Then I'll turn it over in a minute and I'll cut down the middle, just like I'm doing now, down the middle to connect the lines. It's a slow process, but I've discovered the quicker I try to get this done, the faster I make more mistakes, and I cut off the sole or I damage it. So you notice I took my glasses off. I'm not sure what I'm looking at, so I'm taking a relook, and I don't want to cut the sole off. It's very thin. So I'm turning it to get the best pitch. You know, a third hand would have been really good on this one here. Someone to pull the sole, someone to hold the shoe, and someone to cut it off. But it's slow going. But you can see some of the honeycombs in the sole. Those are empty spaces in that, and I'm going to have to feel it has enough that I can put a midsole over that to secure this 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch buildup, that it'll stay. The sole is really, really stiff, and I kept wondering if my knife is sharp enough. The insole is there. You can see that. I've cut it down to just before off the tip of the toe. I'll cut it all the way off. Now it's all the way off, and you can see it's got the back part has quite a bit of stuff. Now I'm doing another one. This is the partner sole, this one here. This one is really, really difficult. It's a cute little sole. Normally we just glue it on the bottom and go back up and put another one, but this has a Nike logo on it, and this young man wanted to keep as much of original look as possible. So I'm cutting it off. This was for me, it was very difficult, one of the most difficult ones I've had to do, because as I cut into it, it's extremely hollow, and I've had to do some filling in those hollow spots, and we'll show you in a minute how I address that issue. But I'm cutting 1/4 of an inch back to miss all the treads, and yet it's tough. And now this knife is very, very sharp, and it's a pain to cut through. I'm having to, sometimes you can cut within 1/4 of an inch into it, and you cut whatever's holding it, and that's why I've changed knives to something a little bit smaller to cut into it. It's not working very well, but it's enough to get me started so I can use my knife again in just a minute. But I use that sometimes just to cut the edge, because these are all honeycombed attached, and if I can just cut enough to get it open where I can start using the knife better, it works much better for me. The knives were still a little bit having a hard time cutting through, so I've got my grinder. And I'm cutting around about 1/2 an inch to 3/4 of an inch deep all the way through to get those first little crisscrosses cut so I can get the knife into it. Now the grinder, you can see the smoke is very, very hot, but it's cutting a smooth cut, and it'll be easy to use a knife to finish opening it up all the way. So I'm using the grinder to facilitate some speed, because it was just a little too tough for my knives, even though they were sharp. But the grinder's making good work of everything. Now I'm going back and using the knife, connecting my dots from both sides. It's still very difficult, but I'm taking my time and doing one side, then go back to another. Now these knives are very sharp, but those particular sole is very, very difficult. So I'm working slowly, trying to keep it from cutting in a wrong position. I've got my knife out and trying to connect both sides and cutting, trying to see if I can get it to cut easily. You notice I'm having a little difficulty, having a hard time holding on to it to get the right angle. I have to hold my knife a certain angle or I'll cut into the upper, which will look really bad when I try to put the sole and finish it off. I'm beginning to pull it down. It's beginning to expose the honeycombs inside, and I'm just cutting a little time, just a cut at a time. And I'm putting a lot of pressure with my right hand to get it there. But the angle's really tough. So you see I'm kind of filleting or trying to cut through. It is so hard, that particular material. I've not seen any material that hard in a long time. But going back and forth. Now I've got the sole off. Now I'm getting ready to glue it all up and do some things. Now because the honeycombs are there, I need to fill those cavities in so I have a nice solid bottom to put my sole onto. So I'm using rigid foam. Foam is part A and part B. Part A is the hardener. I mix this with equal hard A and B so it'll be hard enough that it'll hold up and will be flexible enough that when that shoe has been bent, it'll give a little bit. So I'm mixing it in a marked cup, telling me exactly what units I've got in there. I'm doing 50-50, and I'll be using a kind of a tongue depressor to stir it with so I get it all mixed thoroughly. So we're stirring, and what it does, it begins to heat up and change colors as it gets ready to be poured. You have to stir it vigorously for a few minutes, and then you start pouring it. Now what I want to do is fill the cavities up with this particular rigid foam, so when it rises, and it usually goes anywhere from 4 to 6 times its size, when it rises, it'll fill those whole cavities in, and then I can sand it, and then I can come back and put my midsole which lets me put my regular sole over, and it'll all hold together and not come apart. But until I get the cavities and get that smooth, then it's going to be difficult. So you can see it beginning to rise up and get taller and taller. Now I've taped the side of that, so if it goes over the side of the sew, it won't mess up the shoe because it'll stop on my taped area and my protection of the shoe, and it will come right off. So we'll watch the rigid foam rise and fill in, and then we'll grind it in a few minutes and make it flat. And the rigid foam is hard. You can see it on the sides, and I'll cut that off very easily. I'm showing you what it looks like. It adds very little weight to it. Now all I'm going to do is sand off the bottom so that the honeycombs will be flat, so I can put a midsole on it and it can bond together. And I've done that. I've sanded it flat, and then those honeycombs are filled. I've taken off the extra on the sides, and so it's getting ready for the midsole. And what I'll do is do a midsole. My oven at about 400 degrees temperature to heat up the 1-inch soling material. And I want to get it warm and flexible so when I put it on the shoe, it'll form right to the shoe. It'll come back in shape so I get the spring in it like I'm wanting. And so I've just pulled it out. It's very hot. I'm going to put it down, and then I'm going to put the sole over it. And I'm making sure it's positioned correctly. So I'm putting the sole over it, and so it'll start securing it. Then I will hammer it down, and after when I get it in the right place, that's an inch sole, inch and a quarter sole, yeah. And so I've got it a little big on both sides. I'll cut off the edges, then I'll sand it down on my grinder to get a good balance and good toe pitch. Now, I've done that. I've sanded it down, got my toe pitch like I like, and I've got an inch and a quarter in the heel and about 3/4 to 5/8 at the ball of the foot. And this is what a regular build-up would look like, a very nice little build-up. It's the white. It looks okie dokie, but I want to come back and I want to change it a little bit. I want to not disguise it, but I want to make it blend together. So I do some grafting and some drawing with my little dremel tool. And so I'm going to put some etching in there in just a minute, and it'll look a little different. See the profile. Inch and a quarter in the back, 3/4 of an inch at the ball. If you'd like to see some more of these techniques, please go to my YouTube channel, Compton Orthopedic.